Hey students, this is Mr. Wagner, and this is the second half of our box and whisker plot video. I've already showed you how to build them, and now we're going to just talk about why we use them, what's important. So again, when we're talking about data, we want to find out what's typical. And so here I made a box and whisker plot that talks about student heights. And this is a box and whisker plot about the heights of girls. And we're going to assume this is just middle school. You say it's sixth grade girls. And what this does is it breaks the data into four parts. And what mathematicians or statisticians want to look at when they're talking about what's normal is obviously we talked about the median last week. But if you're not exactly 65 inches, how do you know if you're still normal? If you're like 58 inches, is that still normal? Well, what this does is it gives us this middle 50%. So our data has been broken up into four parts. So here's the bottom 25% of students are between 57 and 63 and a half. Then you have 25% of students in here, 25% in here, and 25% here. So this box in the middle says this is the middle 50%. So what it does is it tells us this is pretty typical. If you're in this box, you're pretty typical height for a sixth grade girl. Now, what that means is if someone said, hey, I'm short. Well, how do you know if you're short for your age, for your gender, for things like that? Well, this tells us if you're this person down here, you're the shortest person in the class. So yes, you are short. You're not the typical height of someone in the class. And that goes for everyone in here. You're a little bit shorter. Everyone in here, they're a little bit taller than normal. And so a box and whisker plot shows that visual really easily of what's typical or what's normal. Now, sometimes in a box and whisker plot, you might see like a dot out here that's not attached to the whisker, and that's just telling you that person's an outlier. And we talked about that last time. An outlier is someone who's so not typical, so far away from what's usual, they can skew the results of data. So if you ever see a dot out here, that's just telling you the outlier. Okay, so another thing that box and whisker plots do for us is they make it really easy to compare data. So here I'm going to turn on another box and whisker plot I made. And now I have boys. And what this does is we can easily see if I asked you who are taller, boys or girls. Don't make the mistake and say, oh, this is really small, boys are shorter. They are, but the reason they're shorter is if you look at it on top of this number line, the normal height for a sixth grade boy is between like 60 to 62 and a half inches. And this is obviously for just one class, so we're not getting too much into sampling and stuff like that. You'll get into that in 7th and 8th grade, but this allows us to easily see boys are shorter than girls, at least for this class. And I hope you see that, because here's the median of the boys, here's the median of the girls. Now, there's one more kind of common mistake that sixth graders make, and I want to show you something real quick. Oops, let's go here. All right. Growing up, as you've developed as a human, you've learned about what has more, right? Which pile has more Legos? I hope you easily look here and say, oh, this pile has more, definitely more, right? And you know that because this pile's bigger. And so as you grew up, you learned that things that were bigger usually had more stuff, right? So we think that this has more because it's bigger. You think bigger equals more, right? Smaller equals less. Small equals less. That's been true for most of your life. But because of that, you might get yourself into trouble when trying to interpret box and whisker plots. A box and whisker plot, we have no idea from this how many boys were surveyed. We have no idea how many girls. All we know is that 25% of them are in here, 25% in here, 25% here. But we don't know if is that 25% out of 100 girls that were asked? Is that 25% out of 12 girls that were asked? And so what I'll often ask students is I'll say, which data set has more? Were there more girls asked or were there more boys asked? And what a lot of students do is they make this mistake. They say, oh, this is bigger, so more girls are in this data set. But that's just not true with box and whisker plots because these are just showing us the percentages. And I'll prove it to you. This girl data set A, or the boy data set, sorry, had 10 students in there. See how it says 10 element list? That means there were 10 students I asked in this data. Whereas the girls, I only asked 6 girls and I got that data. So just because the box and whisker plot is bigger does not mean there's more data. All right, do not make that mistake. So if that's the case, then what does it mean that this box and whisker plot is bigger? What does that tell us as a statistician? Pause the video for a second and think about it. What does it mean that this one's so much bigger than this, even though I only asked 6 girls? All right, I hope you paused the video and you're back. But what this tells us is how spread out the data is. This just means the girls' heights were way more varied, way more spread out. There's a lot more difference in their heights. We have a girl way down here who's 57, and the tallest girl's way up here at 70. So we have a big range, and it's really spread out of the girls' heights. Whereas the boys are all about the same height in 6th grade. You know, they're more packed together. So when you see a box and whisker plot that has the box really close together, that just means there's less variability, there's less difference in your data. People are more the same. There's more sameness, right? So I hope you get that distinction. That's kind of the whole reason I made this video. I wanted you to recognize this because students will often get that wrong. A bigger box and whisker plot does not mean there's more data. It means the data is more spread out, okay? So I hope you learned a little bit more from this, and ask me if you have any questions when you try to interpret these. It's a little bit difficult. This is the first time you guys have been seeing these things, so please ask questions, all right? Thanks a lot, and I'll see you later.